Okay. I'm sure there will be many, many more people trickling in. But welcome everyone to this bi-weekly standing delegate call for ZKsync delegates. For those of you, my name is Shelby. I am the governance experience gal at the ZKsync Association. I will just be lightly facilitating this call, but this is fully up to you guys. I see Dr. Nick is on the call, which is fantastic because he's exactly the guy I wanted to have say a few words about the topic that was proposed today. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. The call will be recorded and as well as like a transcript that I'll use to create notes. I know there were some comments and questions about sharing the actual recording of these calls that came up in the forum or in other places as well. So please, if there are strong feelings about this, maybe we kind of find a way to like gain consensus around what we want to do with this. If folks aren't happy with just having the notes shared with all of the links, the relevant links. I'll think of a good way to do that so we can kind of come to consensus around that. But for now, it's being recorded. But right now, the probably won't be shared. Just the transcript will be used to make notes. Please take your turn and raise your hand if you have something to say or you want to speak, or feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat. As we did with the first delegate call, the second one, I also posted a thread on the forum last Friday, asking folks to send in ideas for topics to discuss on the call. Cap suggested we discuss TPPs as there was a really great thought piece that was shared by Dr. Nick last week that I think everyone's probably already taken a look at, and if you haven't, would highly recommend, as well as another, the TPP FAQ that we posted last week on the forum as well. So yeah, that's kind of the main topic to discuss today, but if there's other topics that folks want to bring up on this call, we have an hour. I kindly ask you to maybe suggest them in the chat or write them actually on the thread so we have a record of them, and then we can kind of go through as they come up. One other little reminder I wanted to share with people is that if you are not in the ZKsync delegate announcements channel, the Telegram channel, I would highly recommend you subscribe to that because that's where all of the important reminders and announcements are being sent right now. I also wanted to quickly call out that on the forum, if you haven't seen yet, to try to make it easier for folks to like pick and choose specific categories or subcategories to follow. I created not only under delegates, delegate calls and delegate resources, but also under each of the different proposal types, the sections for each of the proposal types on the forum. There's drafts, active, and archived, you see here. So you can also subscribe to notifications for each of those as well, if that's helpful to you. I just wanted to call that out to try to make your lives also a little easier so you can kind of pick and choose your notifications that are important to you. Cool. Okay, then I will kick it off, or I guess I'll hand it over to you guys. Maybe Dr. Nick, if you're on the call, if you want to say a few words about your post that you shared last week, I'll also share it in the chat here. Yeah, just to. Oh yes, sorry, folks. Yeah, everybody should be in now. Yeah, or Dr. Nick, if you want to say a few words, otherwise, Cap, since you're the one who proposed it, I'd be happy for you to jump in here as well to kick us off.
Nick, you're muted.
Still muted, or you're not, I guess you're, yeah, there, okay, he might rejoin.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Headphone glitch, weird. Hey everyone. Yeah, so thanks everyone for sort of engaging with that post and stuff. I was really just kind of looking at the TPP mechanism and sort of thinking through what kind of framework we might be able to work with it. So as some of you might know, I've been thinking about DAOs for quite a long time, and generally been thinking a lot about the nature of the current state of DAOs and where to push them forward. A lot of my thinking on this matter has been, you know, how do we get more decentralized? Like, what is the path towards more trustless execution in DAOs? And I think actually the token program proposal pathway, if you like, is a way to do this. So in this post, I kind of overview what the mechanisms are we've got to play with. There's three sort of paths. We've got the sort of zip path, which is very protocol focused. The gap path, which is a kind of meta governance system, very open in scope at the moment, but is a kind of on-chain snapshot, if you like, which can lead to essentially on-chain paths to setting the rules, if you like. So I play with both of that mechanism and the TPP framework in this. And yeah, Shelby, that's super useful actually. If you could like scroll down to the next, I'll just go through the images to try and explain these, and then it might be a good idea to just so yeah, I kind of just, this is what I called an elemental token program. So if you can think about instead of putting money in a space where it's governed by a set of people, which is quite often where the sort of DAO paradigm has gone to in recent times. For those of you just seen, there's an Arbitrum proposal up at the moment, which is actually trying to claw back a big chunk of money that went into a kind of gaming fund. And largely, the problem is money going into a pot, and then it's accountable to this group of people. And then in order to get access to that money, you have to go through a group of people. And I think what we're trying to do is to take those humans out of the loop and replace them with mechanisms. So I kind of propose a mechanism here is like as simple as you can possibly get, which is a smart contract emits tokens linearly for 3 months and produces on-chain outcomes. I was actually thinking about, you know, very simple staking mechanism, for example, provide liquidity in, let's say, a USDC ZK pool, stake the LP tokens, earn a pro rata share of ZK emissions over that month for doing so. Very, very simple. But you can imagine there's a mechanism here which is triggered directly from the governor contracts, initializes a smart contract that triggers this token proposal, and there's no humans in the loop at all, right? So you can imagine a smart contract system which is governance vote, execution, full token program is executed and just terminates, right? And there's been no humans in the loop in that sort of system. And I think this is the kind of thing that we're aiming for. So if you scan on a little bit, Shelby, I think I'll, oh yeah, and I mentioned basically, yes, there's another thing that I've noticed in a lot of DAOs recently is that we've used these kind of delegate structures, right, which is fundamentally a crypto-economic decision-making system, right? The post-airdrop, the tokens have collected around a degree of delegates, largely those who were kind of there, who put themselves forward as a delegate position at that time. And we get this kind of structure of power, if you like, which arises through the delegate system, which is largely the dominant paradigm as is used in protocol DAOs today. But what we're seeing elsewhere in some of the other DAOs is that the decision making that happens out of that, it just gets clogged up, this global consensus layer with quite complex decisions. So people will come in and say, hey, I want to do a a side event at DevCon or something. And also, I want a $250 million, exit, set up a fund that manages $250 million, and we get everything in between. So what DAOs have generally ended up doing is delegating chunks of treasury to sub-actors and what have you, to try and get over this inefficiency, if you like, of delegate-based decision-making as a decision-making tool. So what I proposed here is, you can imagine the TPPs having very simple decision-making processes, which is simply, there's an initialization one, which is where we get into a more deliberative form of governance, and hopefully a lot of that will have happened in the proposal formation process. So we've got like a period of time prior to the proposal going up. Ideally, we wouldn't get things being posted up by delegates unless they were within a kind of frame or framework of what we were looking for. And then at that point, we move into a space where we just hit start, pause, continue and iterate on these things. So they're kind of dials. I call this dials over dialogue. We're trying to get in a system where we've got smart contracts, which are just initialized in certain parameters. You can change those parameters and you can start and stop them. And that leads us towards a kind of way of thinking about governance minimization in DAOs, which should push us past a lot of the kind of spiraling, what I call bureaucratic decay in the post, of which there's quite a bit about in a number of other DAOs. If we go to the next one, Shelby. And then I kind of essentially followed this forward to imagine a system of these chained up, right? There was a slight, and I've just noticed there's another post on governance cycles, which has come back up again, which I actually there's an element of that in this, right? Where we've got structuring decision-making in such a way that it doesn't overload the global consensus with complex decision. It's now simple decisions, and they're chained up in a way that they don't all overlap with one another. And we have this periodic decision-making processes. And I don't know, this is just, I think of these like, I don't know if anyone's ever used Ableton or any of those DAW-like music programming things, but this is like tracks, right? Where you've got, you're programming your sort of beats into bars, and these are the different instruments on the way down, and together it makes a program of stuff. What you can do is synchronize these things where all our decision making is just, we turn up at the end of the month and we hit, play and stop and iterate on these things. There's another kind of a slight important idea in this, which is we can define the schema or the rules of the game, if you like, at the meta level, which means that we can set things like a token inflation threshold. That is the maximum that the DAO is going to inflate the token is going to mint from the capped minters over a period of time, has a threshold set. And that's the kind of thing we could set using the gap system. So essentially, we can all reach consensus on a set of global parameters, which is something that we can think about deliberating pretty soon, I think. And that essentially sets the boundaries of the game that we're playing within, which allows people to make informed decisions about the token. So I think if you scroll down a little bit more, Shelby, is there anything else in there that's worth digging out? Yeah, and I think there's, if you pop back up a little bit, there's some questions we might want to dig into. But essentially, yeah, I think one of the questions is like, how do we get such a program going, right? Because instead of just giving people money in a multi-sig, so yeah, if you leave it there, Shelby, that's great. This kind of list of features we might be looking at. Yeah, so what we're aiming for, trustless execution, right? So instead of money goes into a group of essentially gatekeepers, all of this is a chain of a completely auditable transaction chain that is fully on chain and executed automatically. That's the end game, I think. Whether we can get there straight away is the question I think that's worth deliberating right now. There's a world here where a single vote could trigger several smart contract initialization events, right? So again, with one of the things we're chasing here is not just efficiency, but hyper efficiency. So we can drop a transaction payload that triggers a whole load of stuff. I'm using Rafa's language here of pipes, not buckets. But essentially, I think these buckets of capital that get controlled by people is where things are largely getting, it locates the power in a DAO and creates gatekeepers. Whereas what we're looking for is like flows of money that's routed via smart contracts. And we'll ultimately end up with having humans at the edges and some decision-making processes there. And I do think potentially systems with like decentralized decision-making systems with voting systems can be in there. And this is basically, we get the full provenance of decision-making all the way through. Money ends up in an EOA somewhere. We can see on chain why it ended up there all the way through and the reasoning for why it got there. And I think this lends itself, and one of the sort of important bits I put in there is each of these token programs has an evaluation period in it. So we bake in a kind of retrospective into every one of them to see if it had the outcomes that we were aiming for. So we say, this is what we were looking for. This is what we hoped would happen. Did it happen? Does the token program need to iterate as in, oh, that worked great. Let's turn it up. Or maybe if we adjusted the parameters, it'll work better. But essentially thinking about feedback loops and evaluative decision making as part of the token program itself. I think the final bit is just recognizing that getting to the dream of full trustless execution, everyone brings fully formed smart contracts to the DAO that just plug in seamlessly, is not going to happen on day one. So Shelby, if you scroll down a little bit more, there's a section, these ones, the maturing execution. And again, I think there's a flow here where we've got capped minters. So the ZK token itself, it's better to think about there being no treasury, essentially. It's not like a classic DAO treasury where we've got a big pre-minted amount of tokens sloshing around in the treasury. What we have is a token contract, which has the ability to mint tokens up to a threshold. And what we can do is sort of print out these capped minters and use them in a network of smart contracts. So one of those could be we give a capped minter to a multi-sig to start with. So we could start to a sort of multi-sig framework at the beginning. And then moving towards capped minters plugged into smart contracts through to there being all kind of account abstraction integrations. And eventually we'd be looking for these things to integrate across many different token programs to be composable. Okay, I'll stop there. And if anyone's got any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them.
Don't be shy. Ed, go ahead.
No, this is awesome, Nick, and yeah, thanks so much for sharing this again. Yeah, I've gone through this a couple of times already, and like the idea and the thesis behind it is great. And I just wanted to point out one thing that like for the for the exact flow that you've mentioned and the way that we would have to track it completely on chain, etc. I think that you'd need like pretty good monitoring and data visualization capabilities to be able to ensure that this really does work completely on chain in a trustless manner and as trustless a manner as possible, because essentially like you can track things on chain, and of course that's great, and that's what we should be aiming for. But every time we try to do this and in its end state, right, because you're not going to be able to get this to happen from the very beginning, because it's like slightly relatively complex, and you take some iterations to get it to the end state that we want to. I think that we have to get comfortable with the data visualization aspect and the tracking and monitoring aspect of it being bread and butter of these kinds of proposals and cap minters. And yeah, that was one thing that I took home from this, which was essentially that you need to have like a whole structured framework around how you would want to implement a proposal such as this one, where and like replicate it on a proposal by proposal basis, essentially, where yeah, you'd really need to have those things in your toolkit. And obviously, like the development of the smart contract is yet another beast. But I think that that'll get standardized as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, the kind of evaluation periods that I proposed here lends itself to this kind of like data-informed decision-making approach, which would absolutely be like sort of superpowered by dashboarding as a practice, right? Sort of. So I sort of initially imagined a flow of where researchers produce reports of such on a kind of just-in-time basis for these evaluation periods. And then if the token program becomes something that is continued in a sort of longer term, ideally we end up with, a dozen or so token programs that are in practice at all times. And we found some great ones and we're just swapping them around. And then we can build really established dashboards out of them. So I definitely think, and this is what it lends itself to, right? Because the data availability of everything that's there, the information that you could get out of these things could be far in advance of what any traditional organization would get. So yeah, I 100% think it would be, so yeah, in essence, we would need to think about how one of the key things is how do we then pay those researchers to do this stuff would need to be involved in our token program somewhere.
Exactly.
Right. Who's gonna pay for researchers? Who's gonna pay for the dashboarding? There has to be some kind of and there's going to be a necessary degree of subjective decision making in that. And I think it's a good way of looking at it. One is like, let's hire this research company to do it. There's this great research company, we can pay them $250,000 a month, or like a quarter or whatever, as is practice in some other DAOs. Or we could get a distributed group of independent data scientists working for us, because we've got a mechanism that opens it up. I think that's the sort of paradigm shift that I think would be ideal.
Yeah, and overall, like, just last point on that would be that, like, obviously we have to be very deliberate about the type of data points that we would want to capture and like steer towards in the beginning, because you know what they say about data and statistics, right? So yeah, so like we really have to be very deliberate about that as well, in terms of the types of data that we're steering ourselves towards.
I think we could probably even go a step further and say, like, what is the hypothesis that we would have this this token program are the outcomes that we're looking for, right? So we are investigating, did this happen, right? So we're setting up a clear hypothesis which should locate the decision making in. And I think someone else mentioned it in the sort of replies. But these do all of these things will get gamed, right? So we create these metrics. If those metrics become super enshrined in the protocol of some way, we'd better hope they're good ones that lead to kind of, zero, like positive sum interactions across the DAO, because they will be optimized, because this is like high value token flows we're talking about.
Elliot, I saw you had your hand up as well. Oh, no, I think he's gone.
No, I was muted. I forgot to unmute. Yeah, so is the expectation that proposers would write and suggest their own TPPs? So for instance, let's say, some example, we want to create new events, and so we would come up with our new TPP to do that. Or is the expectation for the DAO to have kind of a set of TPPs already in place?
Was the question, so like, let's say you did want to get an event funded by the DAO,
For instance.
For instance. Yeah, one of the, I guess that's an interesting one, right? Because that's explicitly the kind of thing we wouldn't want to come to the like that wouldn't be a token proposal in my mind. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shelby, but we wouldn't have. I mean, in theory, I guess you could have an events one or something, but you're, I guess like, yeah, I can't imagine a smart contract system that easily just generates events. Maybe it's the foundation that does that stuff. I don't know. Thoughts on that one, Sean?
Yes.
Maybe this was not the best example. But we could imagine, let's say, in that case, a TPP for I don't know, NFTs being minted on chain, or sky is the limit. And in that case, is the expectation for the proposer to make the TPP? Is a DAO gonna build TPP templates? Maybe by hiring a bunch of consultants to do it. Like, what's the expectation here?
So first, yeah, if you haven't seen the TPP FAQ yet, there's actually a few kind of examples of how to rethink some of these things, and including like for like a one-off event. So there's like an example here on that. But in terms of expectation, I guess there is a proposal template for a TPP. It is becoming very clear, though, that in kind of seeing some of the drafting of this TPP that is meant to hit the forum this week, that there's a lot of other infrastructure that's kind of technically complex that it has to go into creating a TPP, including just deploying a cat minter. Not everybody who is going to be authoring a TPP is going to know how to do that, or have the resources to do that. So Rafa and I have been working really hard to kind of think through. We've been kind of like had some insight into the drafting of this first TPP with the purpose of kind of figure out what's missing, what resources, what information is missing, so that other people are able to do this accessibly or set up their own TPPs accessibly. And we've actually been working with Scopelift to create a cat minter factory to make that nice, easy, and simple. It's we'll hopefully have that deployed on mainnet this week, so that will also make that part of it easier. We're also we'll have to be evolving the templates, creating proposal code templates as well for these types of proposals, etc. And obviously these we'll learn a lot, I think, through this first TPP that's meant to go on the forum this week. But yeah, it's yeah. So those are kind of some of the main examples of resources and support that we're trying to also already provide for folks. And I think also, like, as we see more TPPs go up, we'll also be able to not learn from them, but also possibly even use some of the infrastructure that's used in some other TPPs as well, and carry that along into others.
Makes sense. Yeah, because I want to make sure, right here on this forum, we have relatively non-technical people. We're discussing proposals and papers, but ultimately TPPs need to be codified into smart contract code. So
if I can deploy a TPP, or if I can deploy a cat minter, anybody can deploy a cat minter, and that's the goal. So
okay,
we're trying.
That's a good goal.
Yeah,
that's a good goal.
We're trying to again make this as accessible as possible, and obviously, especially in the beginning, Rafa and I will be we'll be there for folks who are trying to get these TPPs off the ground, because it is complex, and we're all learning. We're all doing this for the first time together. So
yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say on that one that we'd be looking for mechanisms that were very reusable as well for many of these things, right? So you can imagine us making a TPP mechanism for some kind of funding distribution process, and then it's there then. It's like a module that can be plugged into the DAO and reused for, ideally, a really good one would have very almost borderline arbitrary use cases or a very expansive use case set. And then ideally we could even get proposal templates that also triggered that stuff directly from the vote as well, as an end game.
Yeah, no, that's after this first TPP kind of goes on the forum and goes through the voting cycle, that's going to be like a main priority for Rafa and I, is to redo documentation essentially on TPPs and make sure that we have there, because there's a lot of steps, there are a lot of things to that you need to kind of think through when setting up a TPP or thinking about the coordination of a TPP that took us a while to get through. So we want to save other people time on that part as well. So that's definitely the goal. Yes, Bernard.
Yeah. One thing that I thought might be worthwhile sharing, something we slightly pre-discussed with Mick, also borrowing some of his concepts. What we see right now is that there might be, a bit of friction coming up, because obviously TPPs is a new concept and a lot of people are now, excited about it, including all of us in this call. But it obviously puts in a certain type of friction from, the traditional DAO proposal for a reason, right? What we might borrow and maybe food for thought also for others, similar to the maturation flow that Nick pointed out in his thread on, first stage was kept minters with a multi-sig with accountability frameworks, and then we move towards more and more automation with every iteration of the program. For anything that still, needs to have a human in the loop, what we think about is that, we borrow that concept of a maturation flow, and for initiatives where we still need to prove a lot of the mechanics, because a lot of the logic behind it is new, we might have a maturation flow baked in and say, okay, if there still needs to be a human in the loop, that is not only accountability, or doesn't only have an accountability function, but maybe even a curation function for, some specific type of programs, that this might also, be a way to alleviate some of the friction or overcome some of the hurdles that some people also on the call might have with spinning up their first TPP, or at least throwing it out there to be able to discuss it. Just maybe one thing to share from our end, because I think what would be good for all of us is just, getting stuff out there, and super excited to see the first TPP come on the forum. So we have some ground for discussion also, and like, okay, what should the metrics be that we measure ourselves against? What is the exact flow of tokens being minted and so on, which will make it more tangible for all of us than, spinning up the next second or third TPP. But yeah, just wanted to share. I think this is where our heads is at, and I think this is really a great starting point also from Nick, providing at least level 1 of the ground now.
Anyone else have anything? Yes? Good.
Hi, Doctor. I just wanted to ask if you see document models at any point in this journey. Use of document models.
Use of what? Sorry, Utrecht. I didn't quite catch it.
Hi, Doctor. I was asking, you said, do you envision the usage of document models for template creation? These templates that we mentioned, do you see any specific document models being involved? The specific use I would make as an example I would use is what MakerDAO uses for their reporting. So there are these automated document models that decentralized agents have to fill up, and it can be automated, and that's part of their disclosure regimen. So everything is done, these document models for reporting for all the monetary MIS of this journey.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, but like, the more mechanized we get, as far as I can see, right? So that would, and again, I think that's something that the GAP system could end up being used for, in the sense that we want schema, and I do think thinking about like agents everything either ends up automated via an agent or a smart contract at some point in the future. So I would definitely advise the working on very sort of mechanistic schema from the beginning, because that's what will lend itself. And thinking backwards compatible as well. If we can stick to ontologies almost, so we can like structure the knowledge in a way that can be machine readable, which I think is what those document models are in MakerDAO, which is that we're going to use these very regimented frameworks, and then everyone operates within these same frameworks at that point on. It's another coordination mechanism, right? So if we can build shared mental models about how to think about these things, then we coordinate about around the knowledge as well as the execution, if you like. So I would definitely recommend, thinking along very templates at the very least, very quickly.
Cap, put your hand up.
Yep. Hey guys. Yeah, Nick, thanks for writing this. I'm sure this took a lot of effort, and it definitely further clarifies and gives great examples of how all of this can be automated, and it kind of goes in line with ZKsync strives to be like, in terms of like just making a huge, I think, headway and progress when it comes to automating this entire process, innovating around distribution mechanisms. So it's pretty cool. Like, I don't have anything like when we talk about TPPs and how they work and kind of the intricacies of TPPs, like I'm 100% with you, like from the principles of how they work and all the mechanics around them and the philosophy behind them, 100% on board. The only like air quotes issue that I have is, I mean, it's not even an issue. Like, I just want to encourage the conversation around them being like acknowledged for what they are, and like to the bare essence, they are an innovative token distribution mechanism, and they should be treated as such. And I think to go 100% all in on them, just one experimental feature for token distribution, is like, I don't want to like put any label on it, but I would just to throw it out there for like an open discussion, because it's like, I would like people and everyone else to kind of exercise caution around that, because it's very innovative. We don't know what's going to work, if it's going to work, or anything like that. So that is like my maybe main kind of concern around them. Some of the questions you answered, and it's pretty cool actually to see that it's going in this direction. And that is like one of my concerns was like, are we focusing on this too much in terms, like, are we putting priority on complex and innovative token distribution mechanisms over accessibility, because we have to create a culture, and like that has to be frictionless, absolutely, for everyone to participate immediately, and like they have to know it immediately once they see it. You, Shelby, yourself said that token design, these contracts are kind of difficult, and you said if you can do it, like anyone can, but you shouldn't use yourself as a benchmark. Like, and we ourselves shouldn't use ourselves as benchmark for what other people will, because not a lot of people have that much maybe patience, maybe like will they actually pursue this if there's like an extra step or a few extra steps. So these are all the things that I just have in my head, and I want to throw them out there. Maybe I'm overthinking something, maybe some of them are like nonsense concerns, but I just want to share it with the group, and maybe someone else shares the same thing, has the same feelings towards this. Again, this is not like me saying that we shouldn't do them, absolutely, but I would like to see them, like some form of go-to-market strategy to, for like a better term, around TPPs, right? So yeah. Also, I had like some kind of thoughts and questions that I posted I commented on the Nick's post. I can maybe read a couple of them, but you guys answered some of them. So maybe if someone has anything to say about this, and maybe I can ask some specific questions later. Yeah.
I think it's worth jumping in there. So I think it would be a terrible idea to go all in on one mechanism, I would say, right? And I think the phrase I use is pluralistic mechanisms. So like, we want lots of these things, right? So all of like experimental token mechanisms becoming some kind of enshrined system, and it staying that way forever would be a bad idea, right? You know, what these things are meant to be is evolutionary and iterative, and there being lots of them. So the point is that we can try these things out and be experimental, and if it doesn't work, we kill it, right? It stops, and that's an important part of this evolutionary design process. I think a lot of the stasis that's happened in DAO development generally is that we've not put a selective evolutionary pressure on the creation of these things. What we're prioritizing, if you like, is not innovation and mechanism design, it's decentralization, right? The point is that we're creating these mechanisms to take humans out of the loop that become sites of control, gatekeeping, and power in the DAO, right? So we're making the whole thing mechanistic, and not for the sake of it, but because it's auditable and decentralized. So really the point is decentralization. It's not to be fancy around token mechanisms. The jobs are those to get the job done. I see most of and I think this touches for that culture conversation which we had in the other thread, which is really interesting, right? When I wouldn't necessarily imagine the average retail user of ZKsync getting involved in token programs that much, right? These things are to facilitate the creation of an ecosystem. So, you know, the token programs are there to like boost liquidity, which make the dApps more, like DeFi dApps, more useful, for example, as one of these things. They're there to seed the network effects on the network. They're not necessarily user-facing mechanisms. Some of them might be. You know, you can imagine we end up doing a TPP which airdrops tokens to users for some kind of like information sharing exercise or something, right? So we might want, you know, everyone turn up and do this and you'll get some tokens, might be something, and all they're doing is hitting a button or filling out a form or something and doing it. They're not creating token proposals. They don't necessarily need to see what they can come and audit and check the DAO out and what everything that it's working on. But it doesn't necessarily, the end user doesn't necessarily need to see the guts of all this stuff, if you like. So yeah, I think sort of to respond to, yes, mechanisms can go bad. We shouldn't go all into them. And actually the point of this is that we try them out. And actually, I'd certainly would like to see a pressure on, like, let's be kind of, let's go with it, right? Let's just try these things out and move fast with them and iterate them, because we can set up proposals which have short timelines, like life cycles. We're not necessarily proposing something that's there forever.
Daniel?
Yeah, I guess my concern is precisely this idea of short cycles of iteration that the whole concept seems to rely upon. And I know there is the auditing program on the way and so on, but it's still, even with that auditing grant program, like, what kind of cycles are we talking about here? Because I'm struggling to see a cycle of less than 6 months for an experiment, or even potentially even longer. And if we need to start with small experiments, given how, like, essentially it would be very hard to justify doing large programs with these. And I wish we could do faster than 6 month cycles. I'm calculating these, you know, it's a napkin calculation. I don't really know. But if we're talking 6 month cycles in a best case scenario to test some of these new ideas, it is indeed an extremely opinionated bet, and of relying exclusively on this. And in so doing, it's risky for the ecosystem. Also, again, I don't have visibility on what other activities, other entities within the broader ZKsync ecosystem might be undertaking. So maybe they're actually doing plenty of other things, and we can solely focus here on playing with the funky new ideas. And if that's indeed the case, and that's indeed the bet, then fantastic. But if not, if that is not absolutely the case, then we're taking a gigantic risk that I struggle to see justified, to, kind of as Cap was saying, to exclusively focus on this approach that I'm super excited about, and I see tremendous potential medium to long term, but I just don't see it materializing really fast because of the constraints of token engineering.
I think that's, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to like kind of, this connects to what I wanted to say to you as well, because I think like we're not, all of us are for experimentation and TPPs specifically, but maybe, you know, 50% staying like firmly rooted in what we know and that has been tried and tested. And so far we have like a couple of DAOs that have tried so many things, and some of them work, some of them don't work, and we have a selection of delegates who are also active in other DAOs as well, which can bring the knowledge to this DAO. So let's maybe implement something that works, like let's stick with the 50% of the stuff that works, and let the other 50% can be rooted in innovation and experimentation and creativity through, but I mean, everything can go through TPPs, but you know, there are certain limitations that TPPs kind of are by design will pose. Specifically, like you can only fund retroactively for certain stuff. So that's number one. Number two would be also like, if there is no on-chain metric to track, I'm not sure how the sequence of events will be coded into like the contract logic for it to be like self-executing like step by step. So it's like certain things like that. I mean, I don't know. These are just like my questions that I don't know, but are in line with Daniel is talking about, I guess.
I think I don't think it's quite as experimental as people are thinking. I think it's, I think it's a longer term bet than is prevalent of across some of the other DAOs, right? The quick and easy thing is to just give some people some money and hope they do something with it. I think this is necessarily a longer term flow. It might take 6 months life cycle in the first instance, but that'll get shorter in each cycle, right? So I think, you know, it's going to start slow necessarily because it's going to require the bootstrapping of processes. I think that there's a way to think of it. There is a bootstrapping phase, right, which might have more trusted setups in the beginning. But I think someone mentioned in the chat there, I'm struggling to think of what does work in DAOs at the moment, right? You know, I'm struggling to think of like, yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. I see a lot of large DAOs massively overspending and things going generally wrong. I think
I just want to, if
yeah,
I could jump in, just because I think this is like a perfect, you know, intro. I'm coming from Optimism. I'm a ZKsync delegate and an Optimism delegate. And I've been on the Optimism Grants Council pretty much since the inception, and even before that. And so I just want to say, like, I think this is an extremely interesting experiment. We've had a lot of iterations over with the Optimism Grants program. Obviously, there's like a few different things going on with the retro funding as well, but it's been hard. Like, I can attest to the fact that there's, you know, a lot of waste as we figure these things out. And so like the bias towards on-chain metrics, towards like already active or deployed projects and stuff, and just having everything, even if it's a little bit more of a hurdle to start like distributing some tokens, I think it's really interesting. So yeah, shout out. I just want to say, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around the concept. I'm just diving in today for the first time. But there are some parts of it that I think like maybe do make it promising as an experiment to try and start with this before, you know, reaching back into our library of like old grants things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's I think like Daniel said, I don't see how they solve overspending. I think it's the DAOs overspend just by like pumping money out the DAO to do something. I don't know what's immediately necessary in the short term that we should start. Like, it's better to not spend than spend because that's inflation that's going to make it into the market. And generally, I think the best thing that the DAO can do at the moment is have limited inflation in the current market, right? When things start, when the market context changes. And I think if you look at Optimism Retro, I think they just went too into one mechanism, right? I think it's the kind of, we can have retro RPGF mechanisms And I would like to see proactive public goods funding mechanisms as well, right? The idea is that we find these different approaches that that open up new ways of doing things. I think the idea is to be pluralistic about these things.
I'm just gonna jump in here quick because I know there's a little bit of a queue of folks with their hands up, and we only have 7 minutes left. I think Sid, you had your hand up. I'm not sure if you still wanted to say something a while ago. You had it up.
Yeah, but I think that I've had a chance to say, so if there's a queue, I think I'll let others chime in.
Okay, great. Then the only one I actually can see, Daniel, did you want to add something?
Yeah, Nick, I would disagree that it's just better to not spend than spend. Like I think the question is a little bit more nuanced, like taking the case of Arbitrum, and again, here I don't have all the data about ZKsync, but in Arbitrum, we're in a situation where the token unlocks from the investors were so massive that they were very significantly affecting the token price. And there need to be a lot of different actions, from setting up OTC desks and different initiatives. But there was almost the point, like it was a bit of a joke, but it was like, hey, maybe we should just run the investors actually deploying capital, because otherwise the token price is going to keep on going down until the investors have fully exited on retail and the DAO actually has a lot less funding to go around. Whether that's from minting new tokens or DAO reserves is fundamentally the same in this situation. So I don't know the situation here, but it would be important to consider that, because maybe we are in some sort of race against time. And in some sense, versus other ecosystems that are trying to do similar things, there is a market innovation pressure there.
I mean, I think the Arbitrum case is why they did massive stepwise unlocks like that. I have no idea. I think they doubled the market cap overnight with a series of unlocks multiple times. I don't think that's. It would be interesting to like. I think it's important here to get the token economics on the table as part of the consideration. You know, the kind of I propose this kind of maximum inflation rate. That would include the inflation for the entire network in my mind, right? Because the spending from the token contract for activity here, and the point of the spend here would be to increase the network effects of the network, which would ultimately make the token price go up. So I think there's I think it's important for DAOs to spend. You know, I saw Uniswap DAO go up to having a $20 billion treasury at one point, and they should have been spending like crazy at that point, right? There's a point where the market conditions are such that spending should like accelerate, basically. So I think these are important questions to have. But I also think that the precedent that we set early on is going to be important. It sets the tone for the future activity in the DAO.
I just want to say or ask one thing, like for everyone to like a thought exercise. What can we do to ensure the success of TPPs? That's it. Maybe that's like creating. You know, I advocate for like we have meta governance leads that kind of do everything governance related, but maybe we should have at least 1 or 2 or 3 ecosystem leads who will see and oversee the entire execution process of these TPPs and make sure that people understand them and like anything to ensure their success. But yeah, the question is, how do we make sure we ensure the success of TPPs? And yeah, I'd love to see some ideas.
I think to Daniel's point and yours there, I think it's like if there isn't something that's an immediate, like urgent issue, like that needs to be in an early thing, I think questions around priorities are certainly an important thing to get out there. I don't think we've had the conversation yet about what TPPs we would like to see in any particular order, which I think would be a good conversation to have.
We can have that for next week or the week after that.
I saw Michael, you had your hand up. Did you have anything quick to add?
Just either response to Daniel. I mean, I think there's a trade-off. I think one of the big things that we've seen right now is that there are a limited number of projects and only so many tokens that you can give out. And so like a lot of these projects are kind of reaping the benefits of grants programs across all of these layer twos, and it's a zero-sum game. If we truly believe that we're going to expand, you know, the Web3 ecosystem, like the biggest opportunities are still ahead of us. So I kind of lean towards on the side of, you know, being conservative with spending now, while we're in this like zero-sum game, limited number of actual legitimate projects, and expand spending as new use cases emerge. Like for example, most countries don't even have a stable coin right now, right? That represents their local fiat currency that everyone has their savings in and spends money in those local economies. And so, oh, Christoph is here. Hey, Chris. Yeah, and so I think like I lean towards the side of being conservative, especially because we've seen so much grant waste that basically just gets distributed to liquidity farmers across chains.
Okay, folks, we are coming up on the final two minutes of the call. Just to kind of briefly respond to everything that's been discussed here today, I think, yeah, Dr. Nick, you said it really nicely earlier on in the call that the goal here is decentralization, and the way the precedent that we're trying to set with TPPs is really trying to put in place this automated version of distributing funds that kind of takes folks or biases out of that distribution process. That is, of course, the end goal. We have a long ways to go until that is, I think, a realistic reality that we want, that we'll build a witness. But and we'll see that in these first few iterations of TPPs. I'm sure there will be some sort of, there'll have to be some sort of kind of guidance or committees that are helping steward that. But laying those groundwork, or laying that kind of framework, or setting that as the precedent, will make it easier to transition over once we're finally ready. And in terms of trying to help make this successful, of course, you know, you guys play a huge role in that, just by participating, talking about these things, criticizing this stuff. But Rafa and I are 100% there to that is like our main goal, is to make governance successful. So we're also here constantly thinking about that and how we can try to make it easier and more accessible for everyone as well. And yeah, here, of course, always for support and feedback from all of you folks as well. So I will close out the call right now. I will share notes most likely tomorrow at some point, but if latest on Thursday. Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. This is a great discussion. Thank you, Dr. Nick, for not only writing that great piece, but also for kind of leading the discussion today. Kind of put you on the spot with that one, but thanks for jumping in. And thanks for everybody else who joined and participated in the discussion. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.